Hey guys, welcome back or welcome to my channel if you're new here. Today's video is super exciting. It's one of my two favorite videos to film every month, my monthly reading wrap up. So we have my April reading wrap up here. I read 12 books this month, so we have this entire stack, and 12 books is either the highest amount of books I've ever read in a month or it's tied for my highest amount, so I don't think I've ever read more than this. And it was a pretty good month. I had 2 5-star reads and just a bunch of really amazing reads. I also have a little bit of a breakdown here for genres. I read a lot of genres. I feel like I read like everything pretty much. I read 2 fantasy books, 1 nonfiction, 3 thrillers, 1 historical fiction, 4 romances, and 1 fiction. The fiction book is kind of like emotional, suspensey drama fiction. I kind of struggle to categorize that one. And then I also read 4 out of 6 books on my April TBR. And last but not least, 10 out of 12 of these books are mentioned, talked about, or either like fully documented in a reading vlog of sorts. So I did a 12-hour readathon this month. I did a reading April new releases. I did a book shopping video with me. I did a random number generator picks how many hours I read every day for a week. So 10 of these books are sprinkled throughout there. If you want to see a more in-depth reading experience or just my thoughts on any of these books, you can head to those videos. The first book I read in April was Bye Baby by Carola Lovering. Carola Lovering is the author behind Tell Me Lies, which turned into a TV show. It was very popular last year and it's centered around a lot of like college drama and relationships, and it was a little thrillery, suspense-y. So I wanted to read her new release because I thought I would love it, and I did. I really enjoyed this book. It was a great way to kick off the month. I gave it a 4.25 star rating, which is a little bit annoying, but it's how I feel about it. I loved this book the entire time. I found it to be unputdownable. It was gripping. It kind of read like a thriller to me, although it's not described as a thriller or it's not categorized as a thriller. This is the book I was talking about in the intro that is fiction, and it's emotional fiction, it's drama, it's a little bit suspense, it's kind of all of that, and I do think it's a little bit thrilling. It gave me the vibes of a thriller where you're trying to read and read and read and find out what happened. And in this book, we are following 2 women, Billy and Cassie, in their 30s. Cassie is like a micro influencer. She has a decently sized following on Instagram. She has a rich husband. She just had a baby, and she kind of lives this higher class life. And then the other girl, Billy, she's not lower class, but she's just average. Like, she has an average job, she's single, she doesn't have a baby, and she just doesn't run in the same circle as Cassie. But growing up, they were inseparable, like from their teenage years to their college years, honestly decades of their lives. They were very codependent and just each other's like family, best friends, so close. But now they are in a stage of their life where they are living very separate lives and they're very estranged, and you get both of their perspectives and you kind of don't know who's in the right, which was kind of what I found to be really interesting. Like, I was reading Billy's chapters and I was sympathizing with Billy, and I was like, oh, Cassie is so in the wrong. And then I'm reading Cassie's chapters and I'm like, oh, I understand why she treats Billy that way. And their relationship and friendship is struggling for many reasons at this point. Like I said, they're living very different lives. They're just at different points, but also they have a lot of past trauma and history to work through, and that has led them to this point. And then in this book, it reaches like an even higher climax, like a big event happens. I'm not gonna spoil it, but pretty much all of their history and past friendship and drama and fights and all of it comes to a head in the book. I was very invested. I just wanted to read and read and read this book. I would say I had that feeling until about the 3/4 mark. It was definitely giving me 5-star feeling, but then it fell off a little bit for me towards the end. I thought it dragged on a little bit too long, and I also thought the ending wasn't really satisfying. I kind of wanted more. Overall, I thought it was a fascinating story about friendship and how people can grow up and grow apart, and toxic relationships and all of that. It was really amazing. I highly recommend. I think it's like kind of underhyped. I think everyone should be reading this book. I loved it. The next book I read was One of Us is Dead by Geneva Rose, and I also really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 3.75 star rating. I would have given it a 4 star. Like, I kind of wanted to give it a 4 star based on pure enjoyment, but it just felt like a little bit silly, like a little bit too unrealistic for me to give it a true 5 star. This book is about a group of middle-aged women, or a little bit younger than middle-aged. They're maybe in their 40s, and there's about 5 of them, and they're in this town called Buckhead. I believe it's supposed to be a little bit outside of Atlanta, except I don't actually know if it's a real town. It might be fake. but they are rich women in this rich town, and they are pretty much all housewives. And one of the main characters in this story is a salon owner, so she isn't a rich housewife, but she kind of caters to all of the housewives in the area. They all have this like membership to her salon where they pay an obscene fee and they can get everything under the sun done at her salon, like nails, makeup, hair, tanning, massage, like anything you could think of, she does. So this salon kind of becomes the hangout area for everyone, and the owner is very much in on the drama. She knows everything that goes on. She knows all the secrets. She knows all the dynamics. She knows like all the people, all the players, all the games. And pretty much the book is following the drama, the affairs, the relationships. You get a little bit from the husbands as well. And I was just like devouring this. It's definitely like a guilty pleasure read. It's kind of like reality TV, like that sort of energy. So that's why it's like, I'm not really giving it a 4, because it was super enjoyable, super readable, but like I don't know if it's necessarily a good book. I couldn't put it down, and it is mystery thriller. I forgot about that point. So a lot of the book is in the past where you're following all the drama in the ladies' lives, but then in the present, the salon owner is being like interrogated by a detective, and you realize that someone has been murdered, but you don't know who is dead and you don't know who murdered who, but you're assuming it's one of the women by one of the women. So you're kind of unraveling all of the drama and trying to get to the bottom of it. And it was just super fun, super entertaining. Another thing that made me rate this a little bit lower is that I thought the end was a little bit unrealistic. Like they kind of wove something in that I thought they didn't need to, and it kind of made it seem a little bit silly to me. Like it just, I feel like it didn't need to have that layer. Like I could have just been like having fun with this, but then they tried to make it a little bit more serious, which I think kind of made it a little bit more silly because it was so like unrealistic to me. But yeah, I had a really great time with this. I would definitely recommend. It gives me like perfect beach read vibes. No brain power, fun, flipping the pages. My next read of April was very exciting for me. I read Daisy Hates. If you follow along with me at all, you may know that I read Magnolia Parks a few months ago, and then I wasn't super invested in the series. Like I didn't want to pick up Daisy Hates right away for some reason. I don't know why, because I did enjoy Magnolia Parks, but it just like didn't make me want to run to the next book. I don't know why. But I decided to listen to this book on audio. So I started it on audio. I maybe got like 60 pages in, and that was enough to get me to pick up the actual physical book, which is what I prefer to do for my reading. I don't really like audiobooks, but it did get me back into the world. It got me excited, and the audiobook was really good for this. Like it was funny. I was laughing out loud, and it did like add an energy and a vibe to the story that I feel like you don't get just from a book. And I guess I can see that's why people like audiobooks, but anyway, it got me hooked, and then I started reading the actual book, and I really ended up loving this. This was like a solid 4-star read for me. I think I may be a Daisy Hates girl over a Magnolia Parks girl. I'm gonna have to read like the rest of the books to really be able to tell. But so far, I do enjoy this more, and I think there's a couple reasons why I liked this book more than Magnolia Parks. I liked this book because I feel like it shows the whole romantic journey between Daisy and Christian. So you see them just hooking up, and then you see them become more and more and more until they fall in love, where with Magnolia and BJ in the first book, you're kind of getting to them where they're already broken up. Their relationship is already like tarnished, and this is more of a start to end romantic journey, which is what I really look for in books. And then I also loved the crime element in this book. If you don't know, the Hates family in this story, in this universe, is like a very large crime family in London, like kind of like mafia, like they lead the English mafia. Like that's probably not the right way to say it, but that's what they are. So Daisy Hates is kind of like a mafia princess, and I love mafia books. So I was eating that up. Like I loved how everyone in this book was protecting her, and she was kind of strong. Like she knew how to fight, she knew how to shoot a gun. So that was another like element of the plot and story that I liked. I also really like Christian in this book. I think he's super hot. He's my favorite man in this whole universe so far, so I liked reading about him. And I really just found their relationship to be super cute. It gave me butterflies, like it gave me that kicking my feet feeling, which again is what I look for in a romance. So all around, it was good. I loved the romance. If you know anything about these books, you know that they are big, dramatic, complex messiness, and like this is no different. Like this book is just as messy as the first book. There's just as much love triangle, love rectangles going on. Nothing works out, and I think that's why they're not 5 stars for me. Like it's a little bit repetitive and maybe annoying to me that nothing ever works out. But I'm excited to continue reading this series. Like, I'm finally starting to love it and see why people love it. Next, I read In a Jam by Kate Canterbury. This was kind of a very random read for me. I saw it around a few times and I saw that it was Marriage of Convenience and there's like small town energy and there's a single dad in here. So it kind of had all of the makings for a book I would love. I love a Marriage of Convenience. I love a single parent romance. I just kind of thought maybe it would be like a good guilty pleasure kind of Kindle Unlimited type of book. And I feel like it was, but it was a little disappointing. It's definitely a very non-memorable book for me, like very middle of the road. It was fine, I liked it. I think it dragged on a little bit too long, but overall it was like a light, fluffy, cute rom-com, and I honestly don't even want to spend too much time talking about it. I don't know if I said my rating. I gave it a 3.5 star, but like as I'm getting further and further away from it, it could be a 3 star. Like it's just, it didn't really do anything for me. Like I think I thought it was cute and kind of fun while I was reading it, but I also do remember kind of just wanting it to be over. So I don't know. Next, I read a very exciting book, a very of the moment book. I read Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, which is her new release, and I loved it. I absolutely adored this book. I gave it a 4.5 star rating, and I don't really have a reason that it's not a 5 star. It didn't seem like a 5 star to me. Like usually when I get a 5 star, it clicks that it's a 5 star, and this one didn't click, but there's like no reason it didn't. I did love it. 4.5 is an amazing rating for me. And my major takeaway from this book is that I love Abby Jimenez's writing. I think she can write a fantastic rom-com. Like from the very beginning, it was fast-paced, it was interesting, there was good, funny banter. I was interested in the side characters. She made the setup fun. Like while I was waiting for the romance to develop and build, I was still enjoying my time. Like she made the most simple things entertaining somehow. It's also like a fantastic summer read, obviously. It's set in a lake area, I believe, and there's this little cottage, and it's just, it really is a good romantic summer book. Like I would highly recommend for a beach read. And I don't think I've talked about what this is about. So the two main characters, Justin and Emma, believe they have the same sort of curse where whoever they end up dating finds the love of their life next. And somehow Emma and Justin get connected on Reddit and they decide to date each other to hopefully like cancel out their curses so that once they break up with each other, they will both move on to find the loves of their lives. So they end up dating. It's not fake dating, but it's a very like formulaic, calculated dating that eventually does become more real, of course, and not fake at all. But that is the beginning of this book, and it's sort of the premise, but I honestly don't think the premise matters at all. Like it's a fun little silly way to start the book, but it becomes so much more than that. My main takeaway from this book was that I just loved the love in here, and that is usually what I love about a romance. Like I love when I think a love is unique, and I do think that the love in this book was unique. It was just so real and healthy and refreshing. Like this book, it did have a third act conflict, spoiler alert, but I thought it was like such a real and reasonable one. Like I actually saw someone reviewing this and they said they didn't like it, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was like reflective of how a healthy, true relationship should be, because I'm not going to go into it too much, but essentially one of the characters was not ready to be in a relationship. They weren't ready with themselves, so there was no way for them to be in a relationship and for it to be healthy. So I thought that that was like really just like refreshing to read about, because usually you read about these people who have real problems like preventing them from going into a relationship, but sometimes they talk about the problems but then they don't solve them, or they just push them aside and they end up together with a happy ending anyway. And I don't know, I just feel like this book actually showed the working through the problems, and it was just, again, it was really healthy in my opinion, and it made this book stick out. Like that is what this book will always make me think of. Justin was also the definition of if he wanted to, he would. Like I think they actually say that in this book, but he does so many acts of service. He really puts in the effort when he's starting to date Emma, and I loved that he showed his genuine interest from the very beginning. Like I love a good enemies to lovers, a good rivals to lovers, a good just dislike to lovers, but it was refreshing. I keep using the same words, but it really was refreshing to read about someone who wanted this girl and went after this girl, and that was that. Like everything was out on the table, and I just really liked that for a change. This book also wasn't like the most butterfly inducing book. It didn't make me super giddy. Like, it made me a little bit, but I don't think that's what the main takeaway from this book is. I took away that it was like a real portrayal of true and lasting love. And there was a quote in here that really like solidified me loving this book. I'm just gonna read it. It's on page 392. If you don't want to read it, like, I don't think it's gonna be any spoilers, but if you don't want to hear it, maybe just skip like 30 seconds, because this is how like I want to feel about love. It's how like it just spoke to me as like a true love. Okay, it says, the best kind of love doesn't happen on moonlit walks and romantic vacations. It happens in between the folds of everyday life. It's not grand gestures that show how you feel. It's all the little secret things you do to make her life better that you never tell her about. Taking the end piece of the bread at breakfast so she can have the last middle piece for her sandwich when you pack her lunch. Making sure her car always has gas so she never has to stop at the pump. Telling her you're not cold and to take your jacket when you are in fact very, very cold. It's watching TV on a rainy Sunday while you're doing laundry and turning her light off when she's fallen asleep reading. Sharing pizza crusts and laughing about something the kids did and taking care of each other when you're sick. It isn't glamorous. It isn't all butterflies and stars in your eyes. It's real. This is the kind of love that forever is made of, because if it's this good when life is draining and mundane and hard, think of how wonderful it will be when the love songs are playing and the moon is out. Like, I feel like it's something I think about in my life a lot. Like, I think a marriage and a lifelong relationship, like, you need love, but you also need more. You need like the commitment and the little things, and just love isn't always enough, but like this love was enough because of everything else it encompassed. I don't know, I'm kind of ranting on and on, but I would highly recommend this book if you want like a good, fun summer rom-com with also more emotional depth and like realness. Yeah. Next, I read another April release because I was filming that April release reading vlog. If you want to check out part 1 of that, it's already up on my channel, and I'll be filming part 2 soon, so stay tuned. But I read Wild Love by Elsie Silver, and I really didn't like this book, which comes as no shock because I didn't really love the Chestnut Springs series. I liked a couple of those books in there. I actually loved a couple of the books in there, but majority of the Chestnut Springs books were like 3 stars for me, which a 3-star rating is kind of the low end of my rating. I rarely give a book in the 2s. I only give a book a 2-star rating if there's like literally something like offensive happening or it's just awful. So this was a 3-star, I believe, or maybe 3.5. Okay, I actually think it was a 3.5, but it was just like very middle of the road, like nothing stood out in it for me. So I don't know what it is, but I think there's just something about the way that Elsie Silver writes. I can't pinpoint what it is. I can't exactly place it, but I think I struggle to connect a lot to her characters or her stories. Like something, it's just like I'm reading and I'm just reading words. Like there's nothing else past it. Like this book was everything that a rom-com should be. Like it was cute, it was funny, it was sexy, it was fun, it was entertaining. I read it fast, but I only read it fast because it was easy to read, not because like I wanted to read it. Like there's not much else to say on this one for me because again, I know like a lot of people love Elsie Silver, a lot of people love Chestnut Springs, a lot of people love Wild Love. So I don't want to be like a big hater and go against everyone, but the books are just really not for me. They're fine, they're fine. Like, I didn't hate it. The next book I read in April was The Personal Librarian by Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray. So this is a historical fiction. I gave it 4 stars, and it kind of like breaks my rating scale. It doesn't break it, but it kind of like changes my rating scale because I typically say that for a book to be 4 stars, I have to say that I loved it. I can confidently say with my whole chest that I loved the book, and that's really not the case for this. But I think it's just so different of a book that like I have to rate it a little bit differently than my rom-coms and my thrillers and my little YA fantasy books. Like it's just different. Like this was such a historically dense and factual and like deep, intense, like rich with history type of book that like I just don't think I can rate it the same. I gave it 4 stars because I really did thoroughly enjoy it. I didn't love it. I wasn't obsessed with it like I am with some of my other 4 stars, but like I think for what it was a 4-star for me. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like my rating of this book it doesn't really matter anyway. But what it's about is, it's about the personal librarian to J.P. Morgan. He had this massive collection of manuscripts and paintings and statues and Bibles and artwork and like everything from like the history of time. He had like ancient artifacts, like so many old things with value. And she was in charge of curating his entire collection, and it was one of the biggest, most renowned collections in the world at the time. And then the very interesting thing about this book is that the personal librarian, her name was Belle de Costa Green. She was a Black American woman, but she was light-skinned enough, she was pale enough that she was white passing. So her and her entire family pretty much adopted these fake identities and pretended that they were white for their entire lives. And it took place in like the early 1900s. So there was a lot of racism and civil rights movements and just like persecution happening. So her family and her were able to live better lives because they weren't being persecuted, because they appeared white. They were able to live in better neighborhoods. They were able to get better jobs. She was able to be JP Morgan's personal librarian. Like, she wouldn't have been able to be that if everyone knew about her true identity. So I thought that aspect was really fascinating. There's also a lot of discussion about racism in this book and just like the current climate at that time and what it was like to be a Black American woman, what it was like to just be a woman in the workforce during that time. And there's a lot of art, of course. It takes place in the Gilded Age in New York City, and it was all around very interesting. It definitely wasn't like a bingeable book. I did try to read it in my 12-hour readathon, and that was not the way to go. It's kind of like a book that you should read like a few chapters at a time, but I did think it was very good. I've read other historical fictions that are a little bit more plot and like action and like adventure oriented. This is definitely way more factual and very rooted in history and kind of reads like a biography. And I would recommend this book if you're like a historical fiction lover. I definitely wouldn't start here if you're new to the genre, because it's not like an easy one to go into. Next, I read my first 5-star book of the month of April, and that was Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. So everyone had been telling me to read this book for so long. I had put it on countless TBRs. I never read it, and I really do wish I read it sooner because it is just as good as everyone said it was. It is a mystery, thriller, crime, disturbing, that type of book. So the premise is that we have two sisters, Claire and Lydia, and they haven't spoken, I think, in 18 years to each other. They are very estranged. They live totally separate lives. And they also had an older sister who had disappeared like in their teens when she was like a teen herself. So she went missing one day and they never found her body. They never heard anything about her. Like, she was presumed dead pretty much, but they never knew. So the entire family was kind of left to deal with this and left with the question of what happened and the tragedy and all of that. Flash forward to present time, Claire's husband is murdered, and this brings Claire and Lydia back after being estranged from each other for so many years. And then what pretty much unfolds is what I would describe as a Criminal Minds style mystery. It kind of gives like one of those crazy psychopath serial killer vibes energy, and I love Criminal Minds. Like, I think if you like Criminal Minds, you will love this book. It had me on the edge of my seat. There was a moment where I was like literally shocked. It had all the makings of a good thriller. It was also very well written, very complex. Like, I definitely had to use my brain, but it was like, you know, when you have to use your brain, it's like more rewarding. I also loved how I felt like I was investigating things and like discovering things with the characters. It was almost like I would have questions and then they would have the same questions, and those would literally be written out, and we would kind of be like discovering things and solving things and remembering little details all together, and that was a really neat aspect of this book. It's a very long thriller as well. It's very disturbing. I would say it's detailed, it's graphic, it's gory. Like, if you are easily squeamish, maybe don't read this book. Like, I know it's disturbing, but it doesn't actually like disturb me. I just kind of go like, oh yeah, that's disturbing. But if you actually get like disturbed, like if you have a weak stomach maybe, like, I don't know, maybe tread carefully with this book. I think disturbing things are fascinating, so I loved it. I also loved how I connected to the characters a lot. I think it's because it's a very long thriller, like I said, but it also is just written very well. You get emotional connections, you learn the characters, you learn their history, and I was actually crying at the end of this book, which I have never cried in a thriller before. So I feel like this book did it all for me. Like, it was just a phenomenal book, and I highly, highly recommend, except maybe not for everyone, because it is very graphic and disturbing. All of that, like I said before. Then I read The Queen of Nothing, which is the third book in the Folk in the Air trilogy, I believe it's called. I always get it wrong, but I finished out the series, which I had been reading this entire year so far. I think I read the first book in maybe February, and then the second book in March, and then the third book in April. And overall, I liked the series. I really liked the first two books. The third book was definitely a little underwhelming for me, and I don't know if that's the book or if I was in like a weird headspace. I don't know, like maybe I just wasn't in the mood to read it, but it just like the book didn't wow me like the other two books did. Like the other two books, I got to a point in those books where I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And it was toward the end of those books, so I was waiting for that to happen in this book, and I could sense that it was happening, but it just like wasn't delivering for me. Like the twist was there, but it just didn't do it for me. I kind of saw it coming, and the overall vibe of the book was just as good as the others. Like, it was entertaining, it was fast, it was clever. That is the way I would describe the entire series. It's so clever. There's so much scheming. It's kind of like diabolical, like plotting and all that stuff, very politics heavy, and I really enjoyed that. But like when I look at the series as a whole, it's maybe like a 4 or lower series. Like I thought I really liked the books while I was reading them, and I did, but like I don't think they're amazing. Like I'm gonna get to a book at the end of this video where I'm like, oh, like it kind of makes me think about these books differently, but I'll talk more about that when I get to there. But overall, I think that this was a underwhelming end to the series. It kind of like made me like the entire series a little bit less. And I also think people talk about the little bit of a romance in these books, and they always say that it's a hint of a romance. It's a very subplot, and it is, but like I didn't care for the romance at all. And some people like love it because it's such like little sneaky little hints of it the entire time that you're left wanting more and all of that. But like, I don't think it was a good romance whatsoever. It didn't do it for me at all. I feel like you might have really liked this book if you were a lover of the romance, but since I'm not, it just like, I was like, okay. You get like 3 romance scenes throughout the entire series with these 2 characters. Like, I don't really understand it, but yeah, I'm happy that I finished the series because I want to move on to other fantasy series, but I don't like to have too many going at once, so I'm happy I finished. I gave this one a 3.5 star rating. The next book I read was a nonfiction, and I've never included a nonfiction in my wrap-ups. I feel like it kind of doesn't belong, but I did read it, so I'm including it, and this is The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. So I listened to a podcast with this guy, and he was talking about personal finance and investing and all that stuff, and that is something that I want to improve upon this year in my personal life. So I bought the book, and I loved the book. I thought it was very interesting. There's a lot of stories in here, so it makes it very like easy to read. It's not like it's like math, finance formulas. It's like very anecdotal, and I learned a lot. I feel like there's not much else to say. You guys don't care about this nonfiction finance book that I read, but if you're interested in personal finance and like investing, I would recommend. I would actually really recommend, but this is like, I feel like it's a little off topic, so that's all I'm gonna say. Next, I read First Lie Wins by Ashley Elston. I feel like if you are in the book universe at all, like if you consume any book-related content, you have seen this book everywhere. It's literally everywhere. It's a Reese's Book Club choice, and it's just like, I feel like it's been being pushed everywhere. It's like one of those books that I feel like everyone wanted to make a bestseller, and it's kind of just like planted there for no reason. Like, I do not understand how this is such a huge book. Like, the fact that Reese picked this as her book club book makes me think that her book club is like less prestigious. Like, I actually do not know how this book was picked. I don't know how it's so popular. I don't know how it's like front and center at Barnes & Noble, because I really don't think it was well done. It was a mystery thriller, and the focus was on a con woman, which I did think was interesting. I've never read a mystery thriller with that as like the main premise, so that was interesting. And you were following her and her current Mark, which was her fake boyfriend, so she like pretended to be dating him, but he was really her Mark, and you slowly find this out throughout the book. And then it also flashes back to her previous like identities and aliases and kind of just her journey as a con woman, which was like relatively interesting to read about. I also started out this book and I was loving it like the first 50 pages, and then it kind of just like, I realized what I didn't like about it, and when I start to not like something about a book, it's all I can think about. And the main thing I didn't like in this book was the writing. Trust me, I am not a writing snob. Like, I'm really not. Like, I don't really pay attention to the writing. I more pay attention to the story, but I just couldn't get past it in this book. I thought the writing was very clunky. To me, everything that the characters were saying to each other, it's not how people speak in real life, which usually I find that authors can nail how people speak, but this just felt so like forced and fake, and it's not how people have conversations, and it stood out to me very much. There was also way too much over explanation in my opinion. So much telling and not enough showing. Like, things were just being explained like almost like you're explaining to a kindergartner. It just overall felt a little forced, and I looked into this book and this author afterwards, and I found out that this was Ashley Elston's first book that wasn't a YA book, which that actually makes total sense to me. Like, I feel like I'm kind of describing how a YA book is written. I was gonna rate this in the 2s, which for me is pretty bad, but the ending did pick up a little bit for me. Like, I was kind of on the edge of my seat towards the ending, and I would say it had me hooked fairly well. So I did end up giving this book a 3. I didn't hate this book by any means, but there was just a lot of things that like really stood out in my mind as me not liking, and that's just like, you know, that's not a good thing for a book if you have like really glaring things that you didn't like. So it was fine. Definitely way, way, way overhyped. And then I absolutely ended the month on a high note. I read another 5-star, my second 5-star book of the month, and I loved this book. I absolutely loved it. And that is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. Sabaa Tahir. I don't know how to pronounce her name, but oh my gosh, I loved this book. I loved it so much. It might be my favorite book of the month. I can't tell if I like this more than Pretty Girls. I feel like maybe I do, but I like them for different reasons. Like I think Pretty Girls was probably a better book, but this just gave me like a fabulous reading experience and a reading feeling. So there's actually a little bit of an interesting backstory behind this book. I did a little reading vlog, like book shopping themed video, where my idea behind that video was to go into a bookstore and pick up a book I had never heard or seen about anywhere. So I usually buy my books based on recommendations from YouTube, TikTok, just anything like that. And I feel like that kind of limits me a little bit because I think a big part about reading is going in, reading the backs of books, picking up what you think sounds good, and that's what I did. And I had never seen this book before, and I saw it in the YA fantasy section, and it just sounded like it was exactly what I was looking for, because I have been on the hunt for a new fantasy series, a new fantasy book to love, and it really delivered. I am so happy I did this little experiment and found this book, because otherwise I would have never read it. So immediately this book gave me the feeling that I got when I read Hunger Games, when I read Divergent, even a little bit when I read Fourth Wing. Like if you guys have read those books, I feel like you know the feeling. It's like the good old dystopian, like that whole era of books. Like this book gave me that feeling, and it's kind of no surprise because I think it was kind of published around the time of those books. Like I think this book is from 2015 or something. Let me double check. Yeah, it was published in 2015, which is definitely closer to that time of book, but it was amazing. And it's not like Hunger Games at all. Like it's really not. It's not dystopian. It's nothing like it. It just gave me a similar feeling. I would say it's pretty light on the fantasy, and I think I'm kind of learning that that is what I like. Like I don't know if I love fae. Like I think I like that these characters were humans, and I think I like that. They were humans with some supernatural elements, which I think might be my favorite type of book. Because even in like Fourth Wing, they're humans. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like I feel like they're humans. Like they're not fae like in ACOTAR. So the premise behind this book, it takes place in a land called the Empire. And there are different sections of the Empire. There are the marshals, there's the scholars, and then there's other factions, I guess you would say, but they don't really talk about them that much in this book. So the scholars are like the lower class and the marshals are the higher class. And our two main characters are Leia and Elias. And that's another reason why I picked out this book, because I was craving like a good romantasy. And as soon as I read the back of the book and I found out there was a main male character and a main female character, I was like, it's gonna give me what I want, and it did. So it says, Leia is a slave, Elias is a soldier, neither is free. So Leia is part of the scholars, and the book pretty much starts out where her brother is taken prisoner by the Masks, and her grandparents are murdered. So she becomes this like orphan instantaneously. And the Masks are the upper military, like the best soldiers in the military of the Marshals. The Marshals are the higher class of society. They rule everything. They're the rich people, you know, all of that. And our main guy character, Elias, is training to become a mask. He is currently in his last year at the military academy. It's called Blackcliff. He's just about to graduate, and he's been there for 15 years. So the story does take place a large majority in Blackcliff. So it's like, it kind of gave me Fourth Wing because of the War College, the military academy. And Elias does not believe in the martial rule. He thinks they're cruel. He thinks they're evil. He doesn't want to be a mask. You immediately find out in his first chapter that he plans to desert. So you have Elias, who is planning to leave the marshals, leave the masks, desert everything. And you have Leia, who is like an orphan, and she's trying to rescue her brother, who was taken to a prison. And eventually their paths cross, as I'm sure you could have guessed. There is an incredible slow burn romance. There's lots of action, adventure. It's very fast paced. There's trials. There's a little bit of supernatural elements. It has all the good stuff. And it was like, I was never bored once. So entertained. It was just so freaking good. And I actually think, like, now that I'm talking about this book, like the way, my energy behind it, it's probably my favorite of the month. It was really, really good. And I highly recommend. It is YA fantasy, but I do enjoy that it's higher stakes. This is what I was going to say about Cruel Prince. The whole Cruel Prince Folk of the Air trilogy, to me, feels a little bit silly and like not intense. It's not high stakes. This is very high stakes. It's dark. It's very violent. People do die. There's lots of murder. There's torture. Like, It's very intense. Okay, so those are the 12 books that I read in the month of April. I had a very good reading month. I feel like I read a lot of amazing books and I just read a lot. Like 12 books is phenomenal. I'm just so happy that I'm able to read this much in a month. That's all I have for you guys today. You can check out my May TBR, which I just posted, to see what I plan on reading next month. Thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more book content. I'll see you in the next one.